prophecy. We've started out and we promised to share with you many American prophets from the very foundations of our nation, which people have ignored. Now, I think that a lot of people ask me how very crucial the hour is, and I think that everybody, to some degree or other, is waking up. From coast to coast, we see people out of work, and it's not getting any better. It's getting worse by the day. Now they're going to give our system a transfusion here, as all of these men are jockeying for position for these parasitical positions of in our political system. I may have quoted this before, and forgive me, but we go back to Cicero about 500 B.C. I want to remind you again what he said. He said, "A bureaucrat is the most despicable of men, though as needed as vultures are needed, but one hardly admires vultures, who bureaucrats so strangely resemble." I have yet to meet a bureaucrat who was not petty, dull, almost witless, crafty, or stupid, an oppressor, a thief, a holder of little authority, and which he delights as a boy delights in possessing a vicious dog. Now, who can trust such creatures? But he made one mistake in that. You see, already, way back in 50 B.C., this was a period when obviously the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Semitic man who was called the second Adam, came here to this earth to establish what we ignore in what is called the Lord's Prayer. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed must be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven or outer space. But being the vain, egotistical, self-centered, overbearing nincompoops that the majority of the thundering, unwashed herd out there who bray like a jackass in a pepper patch looking for an answer, where in the next breath they might admit that they were a child of God. And I say, well, he gave you a manual by which to believe and by which to live, and he told you the laws and the things that are eternal. And yet there'll be some half-witted, moronic-looking individual come up to me with this all prayed up, paid up, and going up, look, their eyes are all glossed over in a religious fervor, and they're going to be taken out of this world when the sand hits the fan, and all of us other sorry, ignorant, sinning SOBs are going to be left here on the freeway as their unmanned cars, that's what their bumper stickers say, that in case of rapture, this car will be left unmanned. So it means that we got to be careful out on the freeways, that if you see a bunch of people being ruptured or raptured, their cars are going to come headlong into you and kill you and your sinner family. Well, God deliver me from that. But these are the same people that quote to you what their pasteurized pastor quoted them, that says, Jesus fulfilled the law. It was all nailed to Calvary. Not so if these preachers had taken a little Greek when they went to the seminary, which I suspect some of them did, some of them slept through it, some of them ignored it, and most of them lie about it. But he said, I came to fully teach. He came as an example among many other things that he came to do. But without getting on to that point, you hear so many people today that are talking about the Dead Sea Scriptures and how that this is being kept from everybody, and everybody's all up in the air about it. The Jews say they're going to sue, and they're not going to release this, and they're not going to release that. Well, I will say this. There is nothing in those Dead Sea Scriptures I do not believe that's not already in our Bible, and that was in the mouth of Christ and all of the forewarnings. We don't understand what we have now. Why do we need any more? But while we're on the Dead Sea Scriptures, and you know that we left off with the president, the saint, the progenitor of our nation, George Washington, where he talked about that there would be these extraterrestrial armies of the host of heaven that would once again, that would return back to our nation. Now, if you're out looking through a used bookstore, one of the very, very wonderful books, The Scriptures of the Dead Sea Sect, in English translation, translation and the introduction and the notes is by Theodore H. Gaster, Gaster. I have a very old hardbound copy, and I'm not real sure as to what, pardon me, as to whether this is even in print anymore. But starting around from, if you do get it, from pages 257, 258, 59, 60, 61, where he talks about the wars of the gods. And it's entitled The War of the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness. Now, if it appears that I'm deviating for a little while, or quite a little while possibly here, I want to prove what your American prophet of God. Now, what is a prophet? A man who speaks words that are divinely inspired. Now, as we go back to Theodore Gaster, he brings out many points. As we know from time immemorial, that has been the custom in many parts of the world here, especially you that might have grandparents and granduncles and aunts that came from Europe and abroad, that they had a lot of tradition that the youth of America and even middle-aged people are not aware existed or ever knew about. But they used to usher in the New Year's, the new season, they would stage these, what they call them, mimic combat, in which the New Year defeated the old infertility, discomfits the drought in the summer, house winter, and life subdues death, and just sounds like Christ. And it said in that day that we'll be singing, "Oh, death, where's thy sting? Oh, grave, where's thy victory? When this mortality shall swallow up immortality." And so we go back and we find traces of all of this worked out in ritual, and the, primitive rituals. A lot of them that still survive today. And the, take, for example, in the, at least in the 50s, I don't know if it still exists, but in the European, what they call mummers plays, which acted out the crucial calendar dates of like midsummer, which portrayed the conflict between the seasons and the triumph of the valiant St. George over, now listen to this, a great grizzly dragon that had threatened to engulf the earth. But you see, these plays, they kept a certain amount of truth alive, but there was such an admixture of heresy put in there by preachers and scribes and those who wanted to water things down, that didn't actually want to insult the children of the dragon, shall we say. So we find that even going back to ancient Babylon, there was an essential element there of the New Year ritual. That was the recital, possibly, and the enactment of a time-honored myth that relating the... Now, mind you, listen, now we're talking about from the Babylonian, and those of you who have got my other albums, we went into this, we talked about, what was his name, Sitchin, that he made quite a to-do about Marduk and the 12th planet and so forth, and I think that there's a possibility to it, and we'll discuss that in just a minute, as to what the Greeks said about it. They kept the so-called myth alive, and I believe that a big part of our myths, they're based on a reality of a historical event And you say, well, come on now. But I want you to notice something. Go back and you start right out in the book of Genesis, and what does it say? Now, if you want to believe it was all on this planet, that's fine. And maybe it was. That is not the argument. But when he said to the sons of God or the children of men or the Enosh men, we won't argue about whose men, whose sons, or who they were. But they were told right in that very first chapter of Genesis, go forth and replenish the earth. Go forth and replenish the earth. And didn't Jeremiah talk about an ancient day of antiquity when the mankind was run into the bushes? And we talked about that this was a possibility in the ancient idioms of those days, so far removed and so far forgotten, because we have trouble looking around to find anybody with the ability to think anymore along those lines, or to think that there's anything bigger or greater than this earth that exists out there in the galaxies and the sidereal systems of the stars. But keep that in mind. So we go back and we find traces of all this, and if you'll bear with me, we're going to get into this, and we're going to show a parallel and a comparison to his vision here. But I want to go back to this ancient Babylon, that they had this New Year ritual, which was the recital, as I said, possibly the enactment, of a time-honored myth that related to the victories of Marduk, the patron god of the city, over a Tiamat. You've all heard of him. He was a, what would be the word, a dragonic marplot. He sought to overthrow the authority of the gods. You see, these Babylonians did not believe in just one God. They knew that there was one God, but they made a lot of lesser gods, and they were probably had been long lost in an antiquity when they were names like we have today, describing the love, the generosity, the act of the one God. And as time goes by, the original one they were speaking about is forgotten. He just added to the God list. And so we go back in, as we research the records of Canaan, we find a similar story that's rehearsing the defeat of Yam, Y-A-M, the god of the waters, and Mot. Now, you remember, those of you that I've taught about the ancients, I found that even among the Indians of Central and South America, Peru, Egypt, and Babylon, when they spoke, and the Egyptians, that the gods of the waters, it was talking about the sea of space. And then we find the god of death, by Baal, the lord of fertility, as he was called, is preserved on clay tablets of the 14th century B.C. that was discovered in 1929. Pardon me, it was Ras, Shamra of the, he was of the north coast of Syria, and it's probable that it was recited in connection with the New Year festival that was celebrated at the same time that the great droughts were broken, the rains began. Moreover, we find also, as we go back through antiquity here, the vestiges of a similar myth in which some would say it's a myth, and Castor thought possibly so. But when they spoke of the Yahweh and the one that they have bastardized his name to Jehovah, it was portrayed as having the dragonic Leviathan and a primordial battle royal, which also may be detected in sundry poetic passages in the Old Testament. You'll find, I think, as he points out here, trying not to be religious or take sides, but in the Old Testament here, in Psalm 74, 13 to 14, and Job, I think we've cited to you 9, 13, 26th chapter, verses 12 and 13. And we may find it's necessary here to restore the world order from year to year as deemed necessary, and in order to bring in the new age, as these people believe, and they which succeeded their present era of corruption. The man was always trying to escape from reality and his mistakes. And so we had these seasonal battles that were projected into astrology, that is, into the standard pictures of the last things. And they have been so corrupted, and they talked about the ancient cosmic powers, and they talk about the final age that was at hand. Well, anyway, before I get too long-winded here, what I'm trying to say, they're talking about, and even back in the days of these writings that was taken from these Qumran scrolls and so forth, these men wrote centuries before Christ. They told of a time of a final battle that was to take place in the final age between Baal or Belial, all of these other corrupted names of the adversary of the eternal, and they spoke to the men who believed in the final age, and most every age thought maybe theirs was the one that was indeed at hand. That was to prepare for this war that was a matter of immediate and urgent concern. They had to have a detailed plan of the campaign, and so here was written down the war of the sons of light and the sons of darkness that was inscribed upon one of the scrolls that was discovered by the Bedouin boys back in 1947. And it was a manual, they said, for the guidance of the Brotherhood of Armageddon. Now, we're going to find that there was some very odd things there. And, like even Theodore Castro, they said there, we cannot tell you when this doctrine was written, but a clue as to the date has been recognized by some of the scholars, and the fact that two of the prime enemies of Israel are identified as the Kidians of Assyria and the Kidians of Egypt. Since biblical times, Kidians, that's Kittians, originally denoted the inhabitants of Kition, Kition, in Cyprus, and was used in the old Hellenistic Hebrew literature it was denoting back at that time a lot of people believed the Macedonians of the Alexandrian Empire, and it had been supposed that this referred to the Seleucids, I believe they were called, of Syria, and the Ptolemies, Ptolemies of Egypt, which would mean actually that the word of the original editor that these scrolls were composed after the partitions of Alexandria's empire. Now we find out, however, that a lot of people believe this isn't absolutely necessary as an inference to Assyria and Egypt, and it is also, of my own personal opinion, you can call them Kidians, to be a lot of people who, there's a few people who do read the Old Testament. They talk about the Canaanites, and many times throughout my lectures I've used those words to try to keep it simple and to the understanding of the people today, but actually it was Canaanites. As we've told you, Cain was the great Khan. It was speaking of a great ruler and his descendants, as we have pointed out in other works. And so what we're dealing with here is a new prophecy that from the Dead Sea Scrolls is not really new, I don't mean that, but it's new to a lot of people. And the term Kidian, as I say, a lot of them came in time without losing any precise significance to be used like a lot of them believed as a Han or Tartar to denote barbarians in general. Hence, we find the reference to the Kidians of Assyria and Egypt been made probably like that to the Moabites, Edomites, Ammonites, Philistines, and merely out of indifference to their tradition. As we pointed out also that the descendants of these very same people, which I believe that George Washington, even though he may not be aware of it, the great yellow peril of the latter days, because, my friends, it is a racist thing. You of the Semitic people are them, as they call you, among many other names, and they are against you because of your race, because they are frightened to death that you may awaken to who you are and your destiny and your predestination as the Eternal says, He who I foreknew I did pre-pick, who I did pre-pick, I did predestinate, who I predestinate, I sanctified you, I justified you, I glorified you, and if I be for you, who can be against you? If we could just get the Semitic descendants of Adam, if we could get them awake, and to understand that, like Elijah in the valley of dry bones, if we could just get these dry bones to come together, Sino upon Sino, and all the rest of the story, and then like his last command, to stand up like a man, and so he could once again get upon his knees and repent, ask the Eternal nationally his forgiveness, and that's what it's going to take to save the last very small remnant of these people. Yes, I'm talking about it could be this summer, and as many of you have heard me say before, you might acquaint yourself with the time of the Passover. And we find so many Christian people who have awakened to the fact that they are Israel, and they are keeping the Passover and the other feast days, and they're trying to be obedient as they return back to the Eternal's law, knowing full well that not by their righteousness, not by their law-keeping, and they know that they were redeemed. In other words, they were bought back with a price by one who was on Calvary. So I don't want to hear it from any insipid, sloppy, agape preachers that are silly and asinine enough to think that we think that our law shall save us. So what it's talking about here and what it's leading up to is Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, brings out when the Eternal said, I, the Eternal, the Almighty Yahweh, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who said, I will bring Gog out of the land of Magog and all of his great accompanying armies that represent virtually all of the hordes of the black nations, the Asian nations, I don't have time, nor will I take it to all of the great mixed multitude made up a lot of the slave states of Russia. But anyway, what we're talking about and what Theodore Castor brings out in this lovely book and what these Dead Sea Scrolls, if you want to go along and part now some of it, I've got to admit that it sounds like fairy tales, which it may be. Some of it is over the head of my understanding, if there's any real validity to it. As far as its parables and idioms, I don't have the time to go into and understand it all. But they're speaking here of the very present hour that we're talking about, that Christ gave us clues to. And he is speaking to those of us in the latter days also, pray that your flight be not in the winter, as well as it applied to the days when Titus held back his armies for 3 days while the Christian Israelites escaped from the land of Jerusalem and the surrounding areas before his giant army went in. So here we are. You better pray that we're in an hour now that there's something like this going to happen to us. It talks about the war against Gog and Magog that will mark the end of this present era of wickedness, to say the least, but not the end of the world, as so many people try to tell us, because I pointed out to you that in the Greek it means the end of the cosmos, end of this worldly order. Now you'll find out a very strange parallel here, that in these Dead Sea Scriptures and in Castor they point out, and I'm quoting to you now from page 259, the war against Gog and Magog will mark the present end of wickedness, but not the end of the world. It would last 40 years. But I pointed out to a lot of you that a lot of it's past, thank God. But we're going to go through the very darkest hour. And God knows we deserve it, or he wouldn't allow it. And he tells us here in the footnotes, it says a period of 40 years, as I said, started in 1967. Those of you who've got my other albums, you understand what we were talking about. He goes on, still quoting, the period of the so-called messianic travail. And see, it's like a woman giving birth, because we don't know exactly what hour or minute she's giving birth to this son. I better clear this up so there won't be some silly people write to me and say that I think that the return of Christ was going to be through a woman giving birth to him. No, that's not so. I'm trying to use the allegory that I got so carried away. The allegory that I was trying to show that, like when a woman's pregnant, we know that she's going to have that child in a period of 9 months if it is a normal birth. And Christ in Matthew 24 and other places, he told us what to watch for. When you see all these things come to pass in this generation, in a generation, as we point out here, it's a 40-year period, and we said that when Jerusalem was trodden down by the Gentiles, meaning nations, when it was trodden down by the Arabs that tried to recapture their homeland, which belonged to the original Israelites and the Ishmaelites also, that they were to share the land of Jerusalem and Israel over there in perpetuity, but those people of today, claiming to be the chosen, they do not see it that way, and therefore they're denying Scriptures. And so, anyway, so much for that. But to go back here, so he's pointing out here, talks about the Messianic travail in this 40-year period, which, as I maintain, has started from 1967, when the Arabs surrounded Jerusalem. And it will up to 2007, and you better pray to God that he comes quick and cuts this time really short. And so this Messianic period, he puts it down this way, that it would pave the way for the era of divine favor. This, too, needed as a blueprint. A small portion of the blueprint is preserved in what has generally been called the two-column fragment. The tantalizing document that was found in the same cave as the main scrolls is really a manual of discipline for the future and restored congregation of Israel, Israel. We're talking about the man of Ra-el. Nobody really knows. I sat there under one of my teachers who was, just the other day, I was taking some of trying to be able to write and understand this modern Hebrew, so-called, that they say they take from the Masoretic text. And it was in 1948 that all of these rabbis got together and agreed on what was to be the language of this nation over there. And they said, well, we will use the Hebrew from the book of Esther, which this woman is a German woman who teaches us modern Hebrew, if you like. I said, well, this is pretty much I said, it's not, any real scholar knows that the book of Esther does not belong in our Bible, that it truly is a Jewish fable as spoken of in the New Testament, where it said, don't believe Jewish fables. You look that up, it was written, don't believe in Babylonian fables, and this is a Babylonian fable. It doesn't mention God once, Lord. It doesn't mention Jesus Christ, Yahweh, Yahshua. It doesn't mention anybody like that. It is strictly a fable, and as this modern-day Hebraic teacher, if you like, said that, yes, it's mixed up. It has a lot of ancient Persian words in it. It has a lot of Asiatic-type words, mixture polluting of the original ancient Hebrew, which is so lost. There are so many sounds in the Hebrew that nobody on earth today can say he or she honestly knows how to pronounce them. It is lost. And then, as my son-in-law told me about, he was taking a class in the ancient biblical Hebrew, and one smart aleck said to his professor at college, why is it so important that we learn this ancient Hebrew and dead language? And the professor looked over the top of his glasses and said to him, because that's the language that God spoke. So we've forgotten God, we forgot His language, and now that this Bible has been through probably 8 different languages before it got to you, is so washed down that we just have a vague outline of what's really the truth. Anyway, now, as I said, Theodore Castor goes on in his footnotes, he talks about this tantalizing document that was found in the cave with the main scrolls is really a manual of discipline for the future restored congregation of Israel. It's excited special interest because it's described as a protocol for a banquet attended by the Messiah and has led to the belief that it deals with the messianic banquet on the flesh of Leviathan. Now, for those that would get all emotional, think we're going to sit down to a big hippo or an alligator supper. No, that is, once again, that is the idiom. He invites all the birds of the heavens to this supper that they might feast upon the lords, the princes, and the kings of this world and their armies. And he's talking about the destruction of this world order, and as I would cite to you to go look in your regular dictionary, I believe it was either Behemoth, but I think that it was Leviathan. I looked it up, and it talked about allegorically, a great ship of state or a government. And so we find even back in a lot of this rabbinic literature, also its pedigrees. Well, I won't get into that. That is not important. Now, all of this is pointing to the future age, and it points Theodore Castor on page 260. He tells us in some of his footnotes is pointing to the new age, the new covenant, the coming doom, he also entitles it. He said the former is quite obvious in the part of a homiletic exposition of the famous prophecy of Jeremiah 31, 31st chapter, 31 to 33 verses. Behold, a day cometh, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. I will put my laws in their inward parts, and in the heart I will write it. I'll be their God, and they'll be my people. And the latter may perhaps best explained here as a part of a sermon or a discourse in the ancient Hebrew based on a string of what he calls similes that are relating to the latter days. And I would give you something to think about in case you're one of these, well, you wouldn't be one of these Christians of a denominationalism unless you have a morbid curiosity or you're really searching. I'll let you search your own heart for it. But why in here would he say in the latter days he would write the laws in the hearts and in the minds of his people, when all of these people over here claiming to be his people, who I say are not his people, because he said so. Jesus Christ, Yahshua the Messiah, Yahweh, God incarnate himself said in Revelations 2:9 and 3:9, I know thy works and thy tribulation, and I know the poverty, and I know the blasphemy of those Jews who claim they're Jews and are not, but they are the synagogues of Satan, not once but twice. Yes, back the tape up. 2 different places he says it, and he's talking about some people that are a farce that took over the throne of God. He said they sat in the seat of Moses in John 8, and he tells us that you usurped the seat of Moses, the authority of Moses. And the New Testament tells us, get your concordance out, and the kingdom shall be taken from the Jews. We're talking about people or not. Now, you have the verse over here with a sorry state of the pseudo-Christians. Oh, praise the Lord, I'm just prayed up, paid up, and I'm ready to go up. I'm waiting for the rapture if it don't rupture. So you see, we got the dumb white boys over here that are running amok. Without law, you have disorder. Without law, you have chaos. Let me, listen. Sit there calmly for a second and open your mind. I want to give you something to think about. to show you a barometer of the level of our lack of morality when us mental and spiritual pygmies have dropped lower than a gopher's garter. I mean, we're lower than whale puck in. That's on the bottom of the ocean. But now don't be shocked when you sit there and slobber in front of your glass toilet where they have this demented, perverted subspecies of a human being that has dropped to the level of not only homosexuality and sex with the dead, but then he eats his prey. You don't even find this act of bestiality in the lowest levels of the beast creation. And yet, oh yes, we love the colored folks. Oh, excuse me, we love the black people. That is the most damnable lie that was ever perpetrated. I don't care if the middle of the roader, any of you white boys or any of you liberals or far left liberals or whatever brand name you're sticking on your forehead, when you sit there and you allow blacks and whites and Indians and whatever that are labeled and have citizenship here in this nation who are sleeping on subway grates, living underground in sewers and tunnels and cardboard boxes, and we spend millions and millions of dollars on a trial from this demented, God, how do I describe this depraved creature that kills his victim, has sex with it, and then eats them? And we spend millions of dollars after this slime ball, this scuzzbag, this the epitome of the depraved and the demonic, this man who said that he was guilty, he said he did all of those things. They should have saved all of those millions of dollars that they're putting in the pockets of these courts and making these damnable lawyers rich and these judges. Why don't they just take him out behind the barn and stretch his damn neck? Isn't that what God said to do? But hey, we're not under God's law. We're under man's law. And everybody, they're all saying to hell with God. And it's going to bring hell down on this nation for our disobedience. Now, I do feel better. But now let us deal with this, the war of the sons of light and the sons of God. Now we find that the first fragment of the sons of light against the sons of darkness, it's going to sound, listen, it's going to sound just like what George Washington said. It just goes in a little better detail. This is against the army of Baal, and it shall be an attack of the troops on the troops of Edom and Moab and the Ammonites in the Philistine area, upon that of the Kitttians, of the Assyrians, and those of the violator of the covenant that gave them aid. When the sons of light, who are now in exile, return to the deserts of the nation to pitch camp against the desert of Jerusalem, and the children of Levi and Judah and Benjamin, who are now among those exiles, shall war against these people, that is, against each and every one of their troops. Now, this is going to be a worldwide thing if we can only understand this, but this man here, I don't believe he really understood it, but there is a judgment day, and as far as dealing with this is another prophecy that I don't want to get off on too many sidetracks, but it's talking about specifically what he's speaking of here that will take place, that is prophesied in the 18th chapter of Revelation, which I say that these people, all of this plague that's going to come on them and so forth, is going to be fallout. And it talks about some pretty big, bright, shiny angel coming to bring judgment on them. But he goes on to say that after the battle, that they shall advance upon the king of the Kitttians of Egypt in due time. He shall go forth in high fury to wage war against the kings of the north, being minded in his anger to destroy his enemies and cut down their power. This, however, he went on to say that this will be the time of the salvation for the people of God in the critical moment when those who have cast their lot with him, we're talking about Yahweh God, they're going to have dominion. Whereas they have cast theirs with Baal, or the adversary of the devil, or Satan, if you like, he said, They're going to be doomed to eternal extinction. And he goes on to say, great havoc shall beset the descendants of Japheth. Now, Assyria shall fall, and none to help her. The dominion of the Kidians will depart wickedness, and will thus be humbled and be left without remnant. And no survivors shall remain of the sons of darkness. Hey, that sounds like some pretty good news to me. I don't know about you. But he goes on to say, streaks of lightning shall flash from one end of the earth to the other, growing ever brighter until the era of darkness is brought utterly to an end. Now, doesn't that sound kind of like Christ in the book of Matthew, where he talks about there be a great light coming from the east to the west? Now, back to the Dead Sea Scroll that we're quoting from, he said, then in the area of God, his exalted grandeur will give light forevermore, shedding upon all of the sons of light peace and blessing and gladness and length of days. And on the day the Kidians fall, there shall be mighty combat and carnage in the presence of the God of Israel, for that is the day which he appointed of old for the final battle against the sons of darkness. Thereupon the company of the divine and the congregation of the human shall engage side by side in combat and carnage, the sons of light doing battle against the sons of darkness with a show of godlike might, amid uproarious tumult, amid the war cries of gods and men, and a veritable day of havoc. It will indeed be a time of, and there's a blank space where they weren't able to translate, it had been cut out or rotted out or whatever. And it will be indeed a time of blank tribulation for the people redeemed of God. But unlike all their previous tribulations, this one will come to a speedy end in a redemption which shall last forever and ever. Now, we've taken you back in times past, and we quoted to you about those fallen extraterrestrial beings that come down here on Mount Hermon, so to speak, that went in unto the daughters of men, and I believe this is the removal of their descendants. But then he goes on to say that when they engage the Kidians amid all of the combat and the carnage of battle, the sons of light shall have luck 3 times, and discomfiting the forces of wickedness, but 3 times the host of Baal shall brace themselves to turn back the tide. But this, the squadrons of the infantry shall become faint-hearted, but the power of God shall strengthen their hearts. And on the 7th occasion, the great land of God shall finally subdue the armies of Baal, for will he summon all of the angels of his dominion and all of the humans that are bound to his communion, blank, and amid the holy beings, he himself will appear to give aid, blank, and he will make the truth to shine forth, bringing doom upon the sons of darkness, and they shall surrender. Now we go back, and he puts some interesting footnotes there, quoting from Zechariah 14th chapter, the 3rd to 5th verse. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight for those nations, as when he fighteth in the day of battle, and the Lord my God shall come, and all the holy ones with him, and etc., and so on. So I promise not to go too far awry. But you see, today, I run into so many of these people that I try to talk to, even about, well, some of the people said, well, this is what my pastor says, and my pastor says that, and I have to identify with this tribe and that tribe and this nation. And I said, can't you identify with the eternal and the eternal battle that has gone on since time immortal? And I try to point out to these people the destruction of Troy there by the Greeks that was described by Homer, that attributed to the conflicts that went on among the contesting celestial deities who were in conflict, and among the contest. I think we pointed this out before in previous tapes to a lot of people. But one of them described was Zeus and Jupiter. Ares was Mars, as I said, was the red planet. and Paulus, Athene, and Venus. Venus is called by both names, and to a lesser extent Aphrodite, the moon, and then Hera, Hera, which represented the earth. But you see, we're so far removed, as I was saying a while ago, we're talking about the Hebrew. You know, each one of the Hebrew's letters, there's 22, and each one has a number, and it means something. Now, Aleph, let that get away from me, but Aleph, it means one, it can mean 1,000, and it can mean a bull. Now, isn't that an odd thing? But you find that in even some of your new courses where they are teaching so-called modern Hebrew. And I think that we pointed out in our other tapes that this was representative of the house of the eternal, the throne of the eternal, and Christendom and Judaism both alike. They have not understood, and they have misunderstood where they read about Aaron and the so-called golden calf. But I'm going to leave that alone for fear that if I say anything about the extraterrestrials, or that there might be somebody smarter than us out there in other planets, and they might really walk around in leather jackets and shoe leather and eat French fries, it might upset them. But, you know, it's so sad. Even though, I don't know if it still is, but was taught through school about the Greek traditions that further attributing to the founding of Troy to Dardanus, whose mother was Electra. And we pointed out who was one of the 7 so-called celestial sisters. And now, remember how we took you back, and we also said that the book of Job, and I dare people, I just dare them, to get out the Strong's Concordance and look up every time it says Job and the Scripture and see all of the different meanings attributed in this, the greatest and longest parable book in the whole Bible, that was talking about a species, a race of people, if you like. And in the ancient idiom, they've failed to understand when Job spoke of his 7 daughters. Well, here we have the 7 celestial sisters, all daughters of Atlas. And then when we find that Troy was destroyed, Greek mythology had it that Electra, she couldn't bear to watch, so she withdrew from the heavens, never to return. And any of you folks that's read Velikovsky, he wrote some really valuable, interesting data on the subject in Part 2, Worlds in Collision. Go back and read pages 207 and to 375. We find it's very interesting that he notes and he points out that during the same century that the Hebrew fire and brimstone prophets also discussed cosmology and impending judgments, and they were periodical in sequence, but among them there was those that are called the lesser prophets, Joel and Amos. Now also, well, he called it, like these 2 prophets here, just point out what they said, that they tried to call the nations to repentance for 3 years prior to the great earthquake, or the earth shaking. And, well, any of you that have studied Velikovsky, you understand that. And then we have the others who included Micah and Isaiah, and their monthly prognosticators, the watchmen in the night. Now, Isaiah's cosmology is described in chapters 24 to 37, 2 Kings 19 and 20. Now, of particular interest, there is a time when this blast was associated, as Velikovsky thought, with the reversing of the sundial and the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem that were some 40 foot thick, and those others claim were 100 foot high. A lot of people said it was by earthquakes, and Habakkuk and 3, among other portions of the minor prophets there, is remarkably descriptive. but I do not think that it was an earthquake. I believe that it was extraterrestrial intervention of some very sophisticated weapons. And I think that through erroneous translations about the lamps and the jars and the trumpets and the breaking, I think there's such misinterpretation there we may never really know, and I may get back to that and dig into it if I live long enough. It is of interest that to note here that when they speak of the destruction of both Troy and the Assyrian armies, those are the armies of Sennacherib, that they were attributed to celestial mechanics. Thus Isaiah was the prophet of crises for the Hebrew, even as Homer was of the bard who tried to remind the Greeks of ancient celestial wars that they might learn by it. But the only thing we learn by history is we never learn by history. And so, the point that I pointed out there, as I have said upon many occasions, where people have trouble trying to fathom when you quote from the Dead Sea Scriptures that there's going to be divine beings from other worlds. George Washington said it in his vision. All these people that are supposedly hungry for the Dead Sea Scriptures and their interpretation, till you tell it to them and they don't like what it says, because that's not what they had in their mindset. That was either put there by their wild imagination or their pastorized pastor or the training of their theology from childhood or just whatever. But don't we find it all just, and I'm going to quit on this and we'll get back to the American prophets, but as we quoted, some of you who've heard my other tapes, when we quoted going back to the time of Ur and Asher and Babylon, we pointed out that this H. Smokel, that he translated some tablets that were found in Nineveh that Jonah went to, and I find an exact parallel, and these say that at least, and I think a lot of times they're very conservative when they say this happened over 1,000 years, or 5,000 years ago. But I suspect that it was even longer than that, possibly, well, why speculate? But as we said, that as they went into the excavations of Nineveh, they discovered in the library of this Ashurbanipal clay tablets, which is describing a voyage to the sky, and it narrated how this he was called the good King Etan. That was the name of this king of Nineveh, this city that was 60 miles in circumference, built in a quadrangle, the one that Jonah, said it would take 3 days to walk across. Now, he lived there, he said, 5,000 years ago. The good king was taken on as an honored guest on a flying ship in the form of a shield, which landed in a square behind the great royal palace, rotating, surrounded by a great vortex of fire. And he said, out of the flying ships there alighted tall, blond men with dark complexions, all dressed in white, handsome as gods. They invited King Etan, and somewhat dissuaded by his own advisors, to go on a trip in this great flying ship in the middle of a whirlwind of flames and smoke. They went up so high the earth, where the seas and islands and continents appeared to him like a loaf of bread in a basket when they disappeared from sight. Now, so we can see, doesn't it? I got to stop and say this. Remember, doesn't it sound like Gilgamesh, how it got smaller and smaller, and he compared it somewhat to bread in a basket, and then John of Revelations, our puffin prophets of today, they've not been able to discern that he was talking about a space flight, and he looking back at the earth as they were leaving it at a speed of light, or probably even beyond the speed of light. And he said, I saw the old heaven and earth pass away. And then he came upon a new one. He was taken there just like the bards of Homer told about the Greeks and so forth. And here we're going back into the Ashurbanipal's library. And back to old King Etan, this flying ship, it said that they reached the moon and Mars and Venus. Now, after 2 weeks' absence, they were to return, and these people were discouraged, and they didn't believe that old good King Etan They thought he had been kidnapped permanently till they saw the flying ship once again gliding back over the city and touched down and was surrounded by a ring of fire. And when the fire abated, here come old King Etan. He descended with some of the blond men who stayed as his guest, it says, for some days. So, a lot of people get mad, though, when you try to tell them about all of this knowledge that came from outer space. All you have to do is look around at your fellow man and try to tell them something new. Even with all the Star Wars movies and space technology and computers and science, people still they're like the people in the covered wagon days. If you tried to tell them about a helicopter that would probably burnt you at the stake for being a heretic. Let us go back for just a little while. Let's go back to the prophecy of Washington. Here, this nation was not very old. Could I safely say that America was still in its infancy? And here we were, divided, brother against brother. Do you remember in the Old Testament where the Eternal warned Israel that they were never ever to take a census? And King David got to trusting in his arm of flesh. And he was warned by the Eternal through his prophet. Samuel, I believe was, came to David, said, don't do this. And he did it. And then the angel of God came and said, I'm going to give you three choices. You want people to die in famine or war and just whatever, or plague. So I believe that David decided that they would lose in combat. What was right? Without looking it up, was 70-some thousand before the angel of God held up his hand, said, okay, that's enough. The bill is paid. Now, do you not realize in the hour that all of Asia and the world, actually, we're being blackmailed? I mean, if you're not, well, let me rephrase it. I'll try to be very careful and not to be rude. But this is not a time for beating around the bushes. Russia is telling us and Europe and the rest of the world, if you do not give us assistance, food, medical, and all this aid and financial help, we're going to have no other alternative other than to attack you. Well, they're going to do it anyway. And I tell you what, that really scares the living daylights out of me is that our silly president trying to get the heat off himself and his no-win budget and the idiocy with which he runs our government, and he's over there trying to keep reminding the people what a hero he was because we went over there and captured Iraq. Of course, we had the world on our side, and we dragged out our whole arsenal in front of God and everybody, the whole world, and we gave them close up, and here there was 13,000 Russian officers over there in Iraq. Not one of them got a scratch, and people haven't figured out we didn't fight their finest. They took the fat boys. They took visitors, Iranians from Chicago, and put them in the uniform. One tap dancer still had his dancing shoes on to give him an old weapon and put him out there in the field. And we think that we whipped somebody. How stupid and naive can we be? And my friends, it's not too much longer that we're going to be baited right back into that same trap. And when we get all involved and get all of our stuff through the logistics, remember Sun Tzu and the art of war is to draw your enemy out as far as you can, just like they're going to do to us over there thousands of miles away, where logistically we're not going to have the finances, the equipment, the manpower, the money to keep up with it. And this is the time that I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt, when all our troops have left this shore, that Russia and all these other nations will come in against us. When I told you about, like Micah through the 5th chapter and others, that the Adam man is going to be as rare as a roe, and it's referred to allegorically that the man of God is going to be like a lion laying in the forest among all of the other beasts. He's going to be a very, very rare commodity. And then this is the time where the Scripture tells us about like 7 women cleaving unto one man to take away the reproach. The reproach is that they're not married. All of this AIDS and this promiscuity and the result of promiscuity has got to and will come to an end, because we will yet go back and keep the prophecy of the eternal. It will become like the dust of the earth, the sands of the sea, like the stars of the heaven to populate. I'm sorry if people don't like it. It's too late for me to do any compromising, because I never will be a Billy Graham anyway. But to populate other frontiers and worlds out there, and what these insipid, innocuous, cowardly, wimpy, beat-down, pussy willow bunch of pasteurized, puffin prophets that we got today, they don't realize that what they're doing now is affecting their very place in the great eternal plan. That I tell you what, in the kingdom of God there's going to be dog catchers and there's going to be garbage men, and these men will be lucky if they're garbage men. I'm sorry, I don't mean to insult the garbage men. I wish to God I made the salary of some of these garbage men. I believe today they're called sanitary engineers. But let's go back so that we might understand the future. So when you got your buns in the ringer, I want you to know why we are there. Because as a people we haven't stood up. You say, well, it's not my fault. I didn't pass that. I said, no, but you kept quiet. You didn't take a stand. You have to understand part of this. People today are fulfilling the Scripture. It says, in that day when my people, in that land where my people are not called my people, you shall be called my people. That's you, the Anglo-Saxon kindred people, these people who in part are blind and do not understand the Anglo-Saxon kindred wasp, if you like, using the adversary's name, that we truly are the Semitic people, so we can't be anti-Semitic if you are Semitic, and we're the descendants of the Adam. We are the Johnny-come-latelys on this planet. We have come here to mess up this ancient pre-Adamic Babylonian system of the ancient con of this world that preceded us in getting kicked out of the Garden of Heaven, which I pointed out in this lost book of Ezra that proves that Eden was built long before even this world. Well, let's come back down to earth for a minute, and let's go back to the time and try to understand the horror and the conflict that went on during the Civil War and even many years after it, and it's in the days of Quantrell and all of the states that were decimated, like Missouri and Kansas, thousands of square miles there in Kansas, hundreds and hundreds of square miles of Kansas that were decimated by these renegades who were nothing more than private armies like the Sons of Liberty under that noble-sounding phrase, and this lousy, rotten renegade, Jim Lane, that led them. But there was whole areas in Kansas and countless counties that if you went into after the Civil War, they'd kill you. And then they brought these Eastern liberals in there to repopulate the area. So the big money powers that be that were coming from the East to settle this part of the country, they would have their yes men and their voting bloc. But let's go back to the time and when God gave Israel a world commission that was to go down through the ages to break every yoke and to lift every burden. Have we done that? but the United States, which I maintain is the new and unwalled Jerusalem, and the United States section of the people that constitutes lost Israel. We broke the laws of God by placing these great yokes on the shoulders of the black race, the Negroid men and women. We made slaves out of them. With what results? Did we get away with it? For a time, just as even you go back to Britain, and what they did was saving Turkey from the mills of God by grinding out His judgment on a section of His chosen people, and the wrong that had to be righted. Now again, by the stripes of men, the South and the North, and our President Lincoln finally said, slavery must be and will be abolished in these United States, and we will not be divided in twain, half slave and half free. Now, Abraham Lincoln also wanted to repatriate the black man to send them back to his own land. But it's kind of like taking a bear out of the woods and his natural order of things, and you put out your garbage cans on Highway, let's say 66, and he starts eating at them. He forgets his old ways, and then you tell him he's got to go back into the woods. So then shall we call the United States, that I maintain, and the majority of us that understand that America is Manasseh. The word Manasseh in the Hebrew means my forgetful ones. Like Isaiah in the first chapter talks about the ox knows his crib and the sheep know their master, but my people don't consider. So let's call them, for the sake of argument here, the tribe of Manasseh, the USA. Just like when we were in Canaan, we were there in two parts, and we were divided by Joshua, east of the Jordan, west of the Jordan. Is it just coincidental that when here we are, we find ourselves 2,500 years later here in America, and as we went back in the beginning, we talked about how this was a great land that was drawn and quartered and divided by rivers, and so here we have the Mason-Dixie line that divides us again in two parts, in the north and the south. And just like God raised up Moses to unite the United States of the tribes of Israel out of the bondage in Egypt, so I believe He raised up Abraham Lincoln. I know this is going to go very bad with some of my friends, but I tell you what, if the Civil War was done all over again, they say, which side are you going to be on? I said, I'll see you in Canada, because I don't believe in brother killing brother. But the Father allowed it because of our terrible sins and disobedience to His law. Hey, like they say today, they drag your butt in court. They tell you ignorance of the law is no excuse. Now, the Bible tells you, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Christ said so. And so just I believe that God raised up Moses. He raised up Abraham Lincoln. He was a man that was born of Puritan stock right from Britain, or England if you like. He was to become the leader of Manasseh, the United States, a great people, and the prophets had predicted that we were to become. Now, with what wise and foreseen judgment did Lincoln work towards unity to win the war and to establish peace? If you go read John Wesley Hill's Abraham Lincoln, Man of God, if you desire to see how Moses, or how much he was like Moses and leading the American children of Israel through our trials and our tribulations, through our peace and reunity. Now we'll see in a minute, and we go back and I've got to show you how this was accomplished by the adversary, because you see the Almighty turns you over to him. Now, Lincoln quotations here. I'd like to quote to you from Hill's book. If ever a man replaced reliance upon the eternal for actually everyday performance right on American soil and answered the prayer, that man was this martyred Abraham Lincoln. Now, Lincoln, he believed that God answered prayer for the United States, and after the bitter disappointments and agonies in the dark ages of 1863, after Fredericksburg had fallen, when treason stalked throughout the land, he issued the following proclamation on March 30th, 1863. Allow me to quote it to you, if I may. Whereas the Senate of the United States, devoutly recognizing the supreme authority and the just government of Almighty God in all the affairs of men and nations, has by resolution requested the President to designate and set apart a day for national prayer and humiliation, where it is the duty of nations as well as of men to owe their independence upon the overruling power of God, to confess their sins and transgressions in humble sorrow, yet with assured hope that genuine repentance will lead to mercy and pardon, to recognize the sublime truth announced in the Holy Scriptures and proven by all history, that those nations only are blessed where God is the Lord, and inasmuch as we know that by His divine law nations like individuals are subjected to punishment and chastisement in this world, may we not justly fear that the awful calamity of civil war which now desolates the land may be a punishment and indictment upon us for our presumptuous sin to the needful end of our national reformation as a whole people. We have been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven, and we have been preserved these many years in peace and prosperity. We have grown in number and wealth and power as no other nation has ever grown, and we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us. We have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with the unbroken success, we have become too selfish, self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God who made us. It behooves us then to humble ourselves before the offended power, to confess our national sins and to pray for clemency and forgiveness. Now, therefore, in compliance with the request and fully concerning the views of the Senate, I do by this my proclamation designate and set apart Thursday the 30th of April, 1863, as a day of national humiliation, to abstain on that day from ordinary secular pursuits, and to unite in our several places of worship and devote to the humble discharge of the religious duties and power to that solemn occasion. That this being done in sincerity and truth, let us then rest humbly in the hope authorized by the divine teachings that the united cry of the nation shall be heard on high and answered with blessings no less than the pardon of our national sins and restoration of our now divided and suffering country to its former condition of unity and peace. Now, did they ever teach you that in school? Do we remember 2 Chronicles 7:14, when my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves, repent, and turn from their wicked ways, and call upon me as a nation, I will come and cleanse their land. So we find the prayers of a nation and of its president was answered. And Lincoln, he took many occasion to unite the nation in thanksgiving to the Almighty God for the success brought to their arms. Now, on May 9th, 1864, when General Grant was pounding Lee's army with artillery and infantry attacks, following that great bloody battles of the Wilderness, Lincoln, he again issued the following: to the friends of Union and Liberty, enough is known of Army operations in the last 5 days to claim a special gratitude to God, while what remains undone demands that our most sincere prayers to and the reliance upon Him, without whom all of our efforts are in vain. I recommend that all patriots at their home and in their place of public worship, and wherever they might be, unite in common thanksgiving and prayer to the Almighty God. End of quote. Lincoln fully believed that the Creator was watching over the Republic, and Lincoln was right. God promised His people that today we are truly the descendants of Israel, that they would be with Him wherever they went, and when they sought Him, they would surely find Him yielding and accommodating non-essentials. Lincoln was inflexible. He was firm on a principle or position deliberately taken. He said, "Let us have faith that right makes might." He said, "In that faith, let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understood it. Lincoln was called to see that, I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God's laws were carried out in the country, selected by the Creator for the what is known as the 13th tribe, as it's called. And in fact, there was a Jew that was murdered who wrote the book, the 13th tribe. If you ever get a chance, it's a must. You should read it. And it proves right from his own mouth that we, the Anglo-Saxon kindred people, that we constitute the rest of lost Israel. Now, as I say, I believe that Lincoln knew and understand that we are actually the 13th tribe of Israel, Manasseh, that we were to inhabit this land. And just as he strove for unity and God's law, he commanded to break every yoke and lift every burden, because and to become the law of the United States from the northernmost point to the southern end of the South. What did it cost the U.S. for not knowing their identity and God's great plan for running the new world which we are heirs? The encyclopedia puts down for that era that the Union loss that was killed was approximately 359,528. The loss of the South was many, in addition, over 280,000. The North and the South, they died in a few years as a result of wounds and hardships. And that is roughly 1 million of America's finest men were killed. And by 1879, it had cost the government in cash and pensions $6,190,000,000. Now, that doesn't sound like very much today due to the rate of inflation. But back then, $1 was really something. And what does the Scripture say? Who is blind but my servant Israel? Who is the fancier today that thinks that the investment of slaves turned out to be a paying proposition? Yet America today and years ago, that's another long story that I'm afraid that I'll get bogged down in. And I would like to take you now and show you how the Almighty... Now, some of you that have heard my other tapes and albums, we went in and we showed how the Ottoman Empire in 1453, yes, the Ottoman Empire, the Muslim world at that time, was used with their horses and their terrific armor that was made out of like the screen you see in front of fireplaces, chain mail. Well, some people think that they invented it. They did not. It went back long before, it went back, the Romans had it. And they used their horses and cannons. The whole thing is that I've already proved in our Pilgrim ship series how they were used to punish reprobate Christendom, reprobate America. It was prophesied and it was fulfilled. Is proven historically, scripturally, secularly is what I'm trying to say, and I'm just trying to show what's going to happen here to us again. You know, almost daily we have invaluable historical books that are either crumbling due to the acidity in the paper, due to the lethargy, they're just sitting there not being read. And then we have people like the Friends of the Library. They're not a Christian group. They go about and they take valuable books off our shelves and they're literally burned. This goes on every day. They spend millions on it. And the people as a whole do not understand this. But there was a book that was written in 1939. It was entitled A Statesman of the Lost Cause, written by a man by the name of Hendrick. And it's got a gray cover and a blue title on the outward edge of it. If you can get a hold of it and you really want to hear about the Civil War and the horrible, sad tragedies and what really went on behind the scenes, this was written from the Southern point of view. You'll remember, as I've told you before, that the winners of the battle, they write the history books. Doesn't mean it's right, but they write them. But I want to go back and quote you from a little booklet you may never get the opportunity to see. It disappeared off the shelves. It was written back in 1958. It was entitled A Beacon Light Herald, written by a great American patriot that died, better than 20 years ago. Published by a man by the name of Pilgrim. And he thought a great deal of Lincoln. And he had on his cover, I'm not bound to win, but I'm bound to be true. I'm not bound to succeed, but I'm bound to live. Up to what light I have, I must stand with anybody who stands right. Stand with him that is right, and part with him that goes wrong. Now, I do not and did not justify the Civil War. I will not any longer be taking sides. I know when I was younger and more ignorant, until I got to reading into the history of the great, horrible, horrible war and atrocity that man did to his own kind. He was not fighting an alien. He was fighting his own father and his own brother. But let me quote to you from what this man said, this Colgren, back in 1958, that was entitled Abraham Lincoln and Rothschilds, and I think that this is really quite something. You hear today about the Lincoln assassination and a conspiratorial cover-up. Hey, there's nothing new under the sun. I'm not going to say I believe this or I don't believe this. I will leave it to your intelligence. Abraham Lincoln and the Rothschilds. Textbooks have been carefully edited, continue to teach teach American school children that the American Civil War was fought over the slavery issue. And that is that the South did not wish to free the Negro slaves. But if we look behind the scenes, we'll find that the slave question was but the surface issue. Below the surface, they ran a current of intrigue that ended with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln because he was determined that the United States should be free from the bondage of international bankers. The Missouri Compromise was written in 1820. 30 years later, a subsequent compromise of 1850 was effected. For 30 years, America had worked out her problems, and the problem of slavery, and later the problem of states' rights, satisfactorily. Even as late as the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the give and take of compromise was effective. Yet in the year 1857, the war was decided upon not in the prospering South, not in the prospering North, but in London, England. Division of U.S. plotted in England. That's the title above it. Still quoting. In the year 1857, the money power of old Europe centered in the house of Rothschild. Disraeli represented them in England, Napoleon III in France, Bismarck in Germany, and Mazzini, M-A-Z-Z-I-N-I, in Italy. According to Mr. Joseph Reeves, who wrote on page 228 of an authorized biography entitled The Rothschilds, the Financial Rulers of Nations, based upon research in their own archives. There was a famous meeting in London in 1857. The great Rothschild family was assembled from the countries of Europe for the marriage of Lionel Rothschild's daughter Leonora to her cousin Alphonse, son of James Rothschild of Paris. Disraeli is reported to have said, "Under this roof are the heads of the family of Rothschild, a name famous in every capital of Europe, every division of the globe, if you like. We shall divide the United States into two parts. One for you, James, and one for you, Lionel. Napoleon will do exactly and all that I shall advise him. Thus in London we see a plan fostered by the money powers of Europe, moving in on America and putting the North against the South under the old principle of divide and conquer. The North was to become a British colony, and the South would go to Napoleon III of France. Judas Benjamin, Rothschild agents. Title of the next paragraph. Napoleon's objection was to assure the predomination of the French over the Latin races and to augment the influence of these races in America. Napoleon decided to recognize the independence of the rebellious American states and repeatedly urged the British government to join him in so doing, according to Mackenzie in his historical research entitled The 19th Century. Judah P. Benjamin was chosen to do the work for the Rothschilds in the United States. He was the first advisor to Jefferson Davis, the president of the Southern Confederacy. Benjamin had been called the brains of the revolt. He was also Secretary of the State of the Confederacy under Jeff Davison. The Confederacy consisted of 11 Southern states bound by a written constitution, modeled in part after our own Constitution. It was founded on the fundamental principle that each of its 11 states had the right to secede from the Union or to separate from the other 23 out of the 34 states of the Union. Nevertheless, at the instigation of Benjamin and under pressure of Napoleon, Texas and Louisiana were placed on the bargain counter in exchange, presumably for Napoleon's aid. The latter was supported by Disraeli of England, who had assured the Confederacy of the support of Britain behind the 9 remaining states after Texas and Louisiana were to be succeeded to France. Intervention of the Tsar saves the United States. Listen closely. You'll see why Russia had its 1917 revolution. English, French, and Spanish troops have landed in Veracruz in 1862. Since June 5th, 1863, the French general Bazaine had occupied the capital of Mexico. The danger was great. The genius of President Lincoln was taxed. He knew the North alone could not have withstood such a combination. Moreover, Archduke Maximilian had been induced to accept the throne of Mexico, but fate stepped in. The Christian Tsar of Russia, Alexander II, through his ambassadors at Paris and London, knew of the plan, knew of England's recognition of the Confederacy, knew the Rothschild plot behind the whole maneuver. The Tsar dispatched a fleet to San Francisco under the command of Admiral S. Lesowski, Lesowsky, on September 8, 1863, in a squadron to New York under Admiral A. Popoff. Both admirals had orders from the Tsar to be ready to fight any power to take their orders only from Abraham Lincoln. Needless to say, this generous and vigorous action saved the United States from foreign intrigue. James Rothschild was left without Mexico and the southern states, and Lionel could not capture the North through military measures. But the European Machiavellis, Machiavellis, was determined on financial conquest, if not actual slavery. Now, Booth's code found in Benjamin's trunk. Now, he was also called Judas because they pointed back to his Jewish heritage. Now, the good Tsar, after several unsuccessful attempts on his life, was murdered in 1881. Lincoln was murdered in 1865, and on April 4th, by an actor by the name of John Wilkes Booth, to whose trunk was found coded messages, the key to which was found in Judah F. Benjamin's possession. Benjamin escaped to England, where he later died. Now, well, it looks like we've run out of time. We will have to continue on with these facts to our next tape. So write me, P.O. Box 1086, Lakeview, Missouri, 65737. And we thank you so much for listening. And we really will. We're going to continue on with some more American prophets and show the sad results of what took place in disobedience to the prophets, to God's law, and blind as to our identity.